Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. I'm here with Suzy Dunn, the founder of Baltimore Fishbowl, which is an online news site dedicated to Baltimore. So welcome to the program, Suzy.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So for listeners who aren't up on the hottest house of the week and some of the fun and inventive coverage that the Fishbowl offers, tell us about the Fishbowl.
So I founded the Fishbowl in 2011. And one of the reasons I wanted to start it was because I've lived here for almost 40 years, raised 4 children here, and was a journalist and a freelance writer. And I would hear stories out and about, from friends, from neighbors, carpool line, at parties that weren't being covered in the mainstream press. And so I wanted to tell those sort of untold, quirky stories, but I didn't really want to be too self-serious. I mean, I like humor and I like irreverence. And so the idea was to tell some of the serious stories, but tell some of the, as I call them, silly stories too. So some funny stories. I love humor. In fact, the name kind of has humor in it, right? Baltimore Fishbowl. That's supposed to give you that idea that everyone knows about everyone else's life, which is how I really felt. I'm from Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, you can meet someone and never see them again for the rest of your life. But in Baltimore, hey, there's the guy that I met. That's the guy from my daughter's class over at Eddie's, or, it's just, you run into people a lot. It's this much smaller world, and it felt like a fishbowl to me. And I really loved it when I first got here because I thought it was fun to be able to have these connections, so many connections on so many different levels. But my husband, I'm like, it can be a lot sometimes, but
you always have to be, presentation ready when you go out in the world.
Right,
sometimes.
Exactly. And so that was the idea behind it, was to tell some of those quirkier, interesting, untold stories that I was hearing in my life in Baltimore.
So with that as sort of the jumping off point, it's now been, math, not my strong suit, almost 15 years?
We're coming up on 13 years. In May, it'll be 13 years. Can you believe that?
So that is that's an arc. And the Fishbowl has been, I think you have a really interesting sense of place and identity. So how's that 13 years worked out? Would you feel like you've been able to stay to that vision, or how have you evolved?
So we've evolved, for sure. We've evolved. So when we first started, my partner at the time was my writing partner, who's now I guess she's the director of the University of Baltimore creative writing program, Betsy Boyd. And so we'd written a screenplay together, and we'd worked on a magazine that I also founded long ago called Paper Doll Together. And so she started this, and our idea together was that there are so many talented creative writers in town, and we really wanted to give them a platform. And so we really focused on creative nonfiction and a lot of creative writing. But what we found over the years was that news really drove traffic. And, not that we're looking for clickbait, but we do want people to come to our site. And so anytime we wrote about a breaking story, people would come. And so we really had to have the mix of more news, just more straight news, and a little bit less of that creative writing. Although we got to be known for some of the creative writing, and one of our star columnist, Marion Winnick, is also a professor at the University of Baltimore. And to this day, her column is one of the most popular features that we have on the site. So we still have a place for creative nonfiction and creative writing, but we do focus more on news.
So I want to ask, actually, for those who don't know, what does Marion write about?
So So Marion Winnick's column is called Bohemian Rhapsody, and when she started it in 2011, the idea was living and loving in Baltimore in your 50s. So she had
Mm.
moved here for a marriage. The marriage had broken up, but she stayed, and it was just about her life here and sort of the humor, the challenges, the experiences that she's had. She actually has a really popular column that posted yesterday uh, that is about her journey with Ozempic and what that's been like. And it's getting a lot of reads because people are curious about that. And she's very
Sure.
honest, open, and very candid about her experiences, which is also always a good read. But she's written 11 books and she's been on NPR. She's a personality, so she
She's
has
real
quite
deal, yeah.
yeah, she's the real deal. She has quite a following.
And
But
only available at the Baltimore Fishbowl, which is
that's
great.
right. That's right. Well, she does some freelancing for Baltimore Magazine sometimes with some of the other publications around town, which is great. I want my writers to be able to write as much as possible and do, there are some publications that won't let you write for other places, but
Mhm.
we're happy. I mean, listen, I'd love to see writers getting more work.
Sure,
But
like
with the
mine.
news, I say we report news, and we do, but we have a very narrow, very shallow bench. We have one reporter and one editor, and then everyone else is freelance. And we have an intern, not every semester, just the semesters that we can offer a stipend. Um, and so some semesters we have an intern, and some semesters we do not. But right now we have an intern, we have one reporter and one editor, and it's hard to do the breaking news because we can't have
Sure.
reporters out on the street the way some of the other publications in town can. And it's a very small team. But I'm so proud of our team because they work so hard and they do such a good job. And
Mhm.
I'm really proud of our audience. We have a great audience and they're able to pull it off with that small team. It's amazing. They're great.
Well, and I think when you are looking at sort of what's the achievable news, like that sort of clarity on who you are and what you bring to the table is so important. So,
Oh,
and sort of that idea of you've got this long form or sort of creative nonfiction bent, but you also are covering news. I mean, like they have to exist together on the same site.
right.
So,
So some of the news that we cover is some more of the cultural news, because
mhm,
one of the things that's important to me for a local news website is to really show the texture and the sort of the fabric of the community. Like if we were
mhm,
just reporting headlines, the crime, and we really don't touch crime just because so many other publications do it and can do it much better than
right,
we can do it. So we don't really cover that. But if we were just to cover City Hall and what's going on on the county council, the various county councils, it would get to some of what Baltimore's all about, but not to the quirky, interesting, funny, different personalities and projects and restaurants and events and things that are going on that make you really feel what this community is all about. And it's not just about, I hate to be a broken record, but it's not just about the wire, even though that's a real part of this city. It's multidimensional, right? It's just like any city. I mean, it's like, I'm from Los Angeles. It would be like saying Hollywood is all that LA is all about. And,
right.
it's not. It's a lot about much more than that. Just, and Baltimore's the same way. There's a lot more to it than just what has been portrayed in the world, as we all know as residents here.
Absolutely. And you think Baltimore's such a city of neighborhoods, and I think the scene or the events going on in different parts of the city, like there is a local flavor there. Like what's happening in Lauraville is different than what's happening in Roland Park or in
Yes.
Hamden or
Right.
or whatnot. And so, do you kind of pop around to what you find most interesting? Like I'm really interested in how you deploy. And we were talking before
Right.
we started to record about kind of your adjusted role that you're still really involved, but you're trying to sort of take a higher level view. Like,
Exactly.
How do you manage that kind of staff and still get done what you want to get done?
So can I just tell you, so we started very focused on North Baltimore, but as we, we've been around for 13 years. So as we grew and were around for some time, we saw that we had more audience, well, in places like, in Howard County and in
Hmm.
Catonsville and further out in Baltimore County. And have always been really pleased that we cover the county more than some of the other publications in this town do. And
Hmm.
and and so that was always a big part of our audience. But I gave reporters early on a really broad instruction, which was, if you find it of interest, our audience will find it of interest. Write things that are of interest. And something of interest can be in Pigtown, or it can be in Lutherville. And something of interest can be in Columbia, or it can be in Laurel. So we're very broad. Really, what's really important for us is to have the right news sense and to understand our audience, because our audience used to be very centered in North Baltimore, and it's still a good part of it, because that's where we kind of started our reportage. But
Hmm.
as as we've as we've been around for some time, our audience really does run the gamut. It's really goes anywhere from all the way from Columbia all the way to the Baltimore County line, and so we don't discount a story. It's really has to be a story. That's the point. It's more the story, not the area that
Hmm.
interests us as much
I
as
love that idea that you just go where your interests lie. And
right,
so, I mean, it just feels like a really sort of fertile place for a reporter to go and say, I'm going to cover the stories that are important, that are interesting, and not feel boxed in
right.
by, like, oh, this is my beat, or we only do this type of coverage. And I mean, your coverage is always super interesting.
Well,
And
thanks.
actually, I want to ask you, just for my own interest, how do you decide those cool houses that you put up? Like,
Oh,
isn't it?
that's go ahead. What?
I feel like isn't that must be one of your most popular?
From
It's not.
day one. No, 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 no. Yeah, yeah, not. I wasn't shaking. No, I'm sorry. I was just shaking my head at my disbelief. From day one, it has been so popular. And one of the things that I've always said, I think our real estate porn is better than anywhere else, because we choose writers who are not just good writers, but they have a very good eye. Because
Hmm.
some institutions will give someone that beat, and they're a very good writer and they can cover the house well, but you have to have that eye. You have to see the detail. I mean, one of the things that was so remarkable to me when I moved here from Los Angeles was the housing inventory. The houses are beautiful, and they're just there are things we could never afford if you lived in Los Angeles. I'll tell you that. And I just thought we need to show
Right.
that side of this city, because I don't think people understand how rich and how historic and how beautiful the housing inventory is. And so when I looked for that for a writer to do that, it was a freelancer. The first writer was Cynthia McIntyre, who had
Hmm.
written for Baltimore Magazine a little bit and and I knew her personally, so I knew she had a good sense, just sort of a good
Hmm.
aesthetic. And so she did a great job. And then that was passed off to um, Meg Fielding, who is on the board of a local Baltimore Architecture Foundation. So she has a great eye too. So it has been very, very popular. It's so funny because, we will write stories, important, intelligent stories, and yet the hot house will be the number one
Everybody
story
likes to
on the
peer into
site
somebody
because
else's
people
house.
love it.
That's
People
totally the
love
case.
people love house porn.
It is a fun feature. So then, what do you? And as a small independent, life is not easy for a small independent anything really, but certainly not a news media entity. So what kind of keeps you going? I mean, there's probably easier ways to make a living in one's life, but what keeps you coming back, especially as you're heading into, you're starting that second decade, and it's a lot. So
It is a
what's
lot,
going on
and I
there?
will tell you, I, I think it was, well, we all know this. If you're in this industry, you're not in it to get rich, right? We're all in it for the stories. The stories are, it's a fun business. And I remember, when I started Fishbowl, a pal was actually my husband's college roommate, and we're also very good friends. And he was the first investor. And he said to me, what you're doing, if you ever want to raise more money, you don't have to worry about the investment, because people aren't expecting media products to make a lot of money. And he certainly hasn't expected it and hasn't had that happen. But he said,
Hmm.
but it's a fun business. It's interesting. And that's what keeps you going. I mean, it beats, making diddlywinks, right? It's
Oh, for
interesting.
sure.
It's a learning story. It's the best job in the world, really. So it does. The stories are what keep me going, but it is hard, especially in this media landscape, especially when there was no
Sure.
name recognition. But we hung in
Well, and
there.
I feel like you guys have such a sense of identity, and that helps because, if you could sort of characterize who is your audience, who is your typical reader?
Right. So I find that with most publications, the audience really reflects the publisher and the writers. And so, you know, in the beginning, it was like what I was. So like a mid-40 mother in North Baltimore. But it's 35 to 45 young professionals, mostly with kids,
Hmm.
um, who live in or close to the city. I mean, I talked about our audience in Baltimore County, and we have some of that, but it's still, or around the center of the city mostly. So
Hmm.
yeah, but
Well, I'm glad that,
we
that
I'm sorry, go
that
ahead.
advertisers are still reaching out to you, that they're reaching out and they're finding value in in I mean, your audience is not tiny, but it's not huge either, but it
No,
is
it's not the
really
Baltimore Sun.
larger.
I'm sure it's not even as large as the banners, but our ads are a lot more affordable for the small business person than
Hmm.
than those two other publications. And we don't have a paywall, and people love that. People, that does keep our traffic up. We will never have a paywall because I don't think that's right. To be a community voice,
Hmm.
you need to be available to the community, and so I'll never go in that direction. Right now, we do have membership, and that helps some, but it's less than 1% of our audience who gives to membership, and it's a small percentage of our total budget, but it helps, right?
Hmm.
Every
Oh, every
penny,
bit helps.
yeah, every bit helps, absolutely. So
So as your kind of outlook is changing, and we talked a little bit about, you have a newer publisher or someone who is named publisher, you have sort of different people in the seats as you go forward. What does that portend for the Fishbowl? Like, is what changes are on the horizon, or are there any changes on the horizon?
well, we always want to grow, right? We always would love to have more reporters, and we'd always love to have more staff, but I don't see a ton of growth. I mean, there's kind of a ceiling on ad sales for us, but
Hmm.
we're having a very good year, and we're plugging away. Just with the team that we have, we're paying our bills, and we're getting the stories out, and so we're just going to sort of stay where we are now. I do feel like with the changes at the Sun, there's an opportunity for us. There's an
Mm.
opportunity for more people to turn our way, but we need to figure out um, what what that opportunity means. One of the things that we've been wanting to do for a couple of years now, and we've really we've set aside some dollars for this, is to really do some deep dives. And I think I mentioned to you before we started the interview that we're starting that, and we have wonderful David Nitkin, who was at the Sun for 13 years, who's our executive editor. He's going to be spearheading that, and he's talking to a few freelance writers now to get that going. But um, we'd have to have that balance. We have to have some investigative deep dive stories as well as things like the hot house and the events. We can't just be candy. And so, I guess going forward, there'll be a more concerted effort to make sure we have that balance.
Yeah.
Um, and continue to grow our audience as much as we can. And we'd love to grow our revenue too, but I do see that just like all these other publications that are um, facing challenges, that's a challenge. That's tough. But we do have a contract with Google. They do pay us for some of our content, which is great. I don't think all the
Yes,
publishers do that.
absolutely.
We're really lucky for that. And we it's those are really our three revenue sources. It's advertising, Google, and membership.
Hmm.
And
Well, and they all, I mean, it seems to me, when you look at ad sales and the advertising community, it seems like your market is really small business, which again kind of just
yes,
like feeds into that idea of the community. Like,
right.
you're for the community, by the community, and always kind of keeping that really centered. And so
No,
it'll
you're
be
so much
interesting to see what you do when you do those deep dives, because,
right.
you know, and there is, I mean, just in Baltimore alone, like if you look at you could totally do a deep dive on the Office of Promotion and Arts, which kind of keeps into your cultural aspect. There's so much content that's like there are stories everywhere,
Yeah.
and I also feel like there's just a lot that still isn't covered. We're really fortunate in the area because we have a lot of small independent publications and news
Yes.
sites,
Mm-hmm.
but they all, and they all have their little niche, but you have to know about all of them. I
It's
mean,
so
like
true.
the Baltimore Beat's doing great work. The Baltimore Brew, you're doing amazing things. There's so many pieces out there, but it is, and they all have really specific points of view.
Yeah, those publishers and I've met with all the publishers of all those publications that you've mentioned, and we've talked about it. We know that in the old days, all of our stories would be on a single sheet in the daily newspaper, right? But that just doesn't exist anymore. And we've talked about working together, but we're all so busy just running our own sites that it's hard to peel off to coalesce. But I could see that happening in the future, but
Mhm.
we need to organize and make that happen. But it is one of the difficulties for sure.
Yeah.
That we can't all come to. We're not all in one place. You can't find everything in one place.
Right. It's that organizational capacity, like it
Mhm.
takes some administrative headspace to be like, okay, how would we collaborate?
Right,
Um,
right, right.
and I think that's an interesting part of news media because there's such a sort of emphasis on, okay, how can we all work together when everyone's swimming so hard to just stay upright?
Right,
Um,
right,
and
right.
and
It's true.
and to keep their own point of view, which is also important because we need all those different voices.
No,
Um,
that's been one of the most rewarding parts of starting Fishbowl is meeting the other publishers and seeing their vision and seeing that we all have separate lanes, but we all are very friendly and try to help each other as much as we can, which is so nice because in print journalism, it's a lot more elbows out. But
mhm.
for us, it's an ecosystem. We're all trying to help each other. It doesn't hurt me one bit if another publication takes my one of our stories and puts it on their site. We're happy to have people use them. People have been very generous with us too, and that's been a great collaborative piece of being in this media environment. We've been
Absolutely. So it all comes back to community for me, like
right,
even
right.
in the way that you're approaching other publishers and other sites. So it's wonderful to see.
Oh,
And
that's
I've
nice.
always enjoyed the Fishbowl. So thank you for doing it and being here.
Thanks so much.
Um,
Well, one little plug I want to get. One thing about us that I love
please.
is that our publisher and our editor are homegrown people. They're not people who went to college here. They're not people who moved here. They're not people who came here looking. They uh, Marcus went to Carver and Nicole went to Milford Mill. They've lived here
That's
their whole lives. It's for Baltimore by Baltimore. And I, as I mentioned, I did not, but my husband is born and bred here. He's like fifth generation Baltimore. So we're all about Baltimore. And
that's wonderful.
anyway, thanks.
Well, thank you for coming over. It was really great to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Sure thing.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.